And so I was having this real intimate time at home, and then these wild times at church, Sunday nights at church. And somehow all of this was like, I want all of this to be part of me for the rest of my life, both the wild and the intimate.
Hello and welcome to Deconstructing Worship, a series of positive and constructive conversations about the current culture of modern worship.
We are your hosts, Kyle Treble
and Steve Quantick.
Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of the Deconstructing Worship Podcast. This is episode 11, which is super amazing. I'm going to hand straight over to Steve to introduce our awesome guest today. So take it away, Steve.
Hello, welcome our guest today, Pete McAllen, under the artist name Pyramid Park. Woo!
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. Nice to see you both.
Yeah, so good to see you, mate. To be honest, this is just a really great excuse just to have a catch up with my mates.
Very true.
I'm just leading into it. This podcast has been so good for my social calendar. So, Pete, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're living, and what you're doing right now?
So I am in Cambridge, UK, and I work as an independent artist under the artist name Pyramid Park. And I basically run what feels like a small record label. So everything from marketing, releasing music, writing music, recording, and all the different things that go on to make that possible. I was going to say touring, but we don't know what that looks like. So the world of a creative, it often means creating content, to be honest with you. And that's been my life for the last 3.5 years. So before that, I worked as a worship pastor at a church in Cambridge, and I did that for 6.5 years. So yeah, transitioned from that, stepped out to do this, bit of a crazy risk, mad journey, but I'm still here, which is awesome.
Carl, did you know the church that Pete used to be worship director at is the same church Wayne used to be worship director?
Shut up.
It's true. I took over from Wayne.
Genuinely, like, you know, you get the phrase of like, it's a small world, and you're like, haha, yeah. But like,
it really is in the Christian world.
It's super
really
weird.
In the UK.
So, like, just out of interest, because like what you do now sounds super interesting. What's like, without kind of, I don't want to like bog you down with having a like work talk, but what's your like daily kind of like nuss look like? What like as like running a small record label and stuff?
Sure. I mean, as you'd expect me to say, every day is different, but it really is different. I try and split my time 70% doing the work of making sure Pyramid Park is working as a business, and 30% on the creative. So, and you know, when you're recording music, you're doing more 90%, 95% creative, 5% just keeping on top of things. But I have quite a lot of systems in place. So I might be spending a morning writing out a month's worth of emails for my mailing list, or preparing something for my private Patreon group that's extra special for them. Or I could be writing a song, or songwriting on Twitch. I mean, it really is quite, there's a huge variety, but I've tried to kind of learn more about marketing from businesses that are not in music, so that I can better market to people who are interested in what I do. So I find it fascinating because it really is a massive learning journey, and there is no right way to do the independent journey anymore. It's just whatever seems to work for you, and finding a way that isn't a closed door. Hence the reason why I did a lot of stuff in Germany and Belgium and places like that, because there were lots of doors closed in the UK. So I was just like, well, there's a whole continent here. Why don't we try that instead? And so that's been my kind of approach. It's very DIY. And yeah, every day is different for sure.
Yeah, I guess like there's, in a good and a bad way, like there's lots of different avenues now, isn't there, to kind of like get like, I guess, like for lack of a better term, like exposure and things like that, where like before there was like one clear cut way, really.
Yeah.
Which has got its positives, definitely, because it was like, okay, I need to be able to do this. Sweet. I need to just plan to do that and just head towards that one direction, which makes it in a way a lot easier. but then also a lot narrower as well, because there's all these people trying to do that in exactly the same way. So I guess it's like it's got pros and cons.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question, and I've asked this to a couple of our guests so far who are kind of doing like their own kind of music stuff, and I'm always really interested in your take on, like, obviously coming from being like a worship pastor, not like one, being a worship pastor, and then doing the music that you do now. What would you say is like the main difference between the two in like your experience of those two separate genres?
Wow. That is a good question. I would say probably people management and administration, and the fact that Sundays just keep coming round, and not just Sundays, but then for us we had rehearsals on Tuesdays. So I was always bouncing between Tuesday, Sunday, Tuesday, Sunday, Tuesday, Sunday, and trying to keep fresh for that when you're playing for this. And I know, like, you're not playing for an audience in the same way, but you are in front of the same crowd week in, week out, and keeping that fresh but consistent. I think there's more scope for creativity in what I'm doing now. And so while it's a greater challenge, say financially, the whole creative in you is awakened at a whole nother level. And therefore I think I'm writing better songs because of that. And I'm able to probably express myself without having to think, oh, is this congregational, or is this, singable, or whatever. There's less parameters. And for me, I guess I feel more of a pioneer than I am someone who likes just doing the same thing over and over. So the pioneering spirit excites me and scares me, but it's kind of, I think that's who I am, and I'm getting more comfortable with being that person. So it's hugely different. I don't think you can really compare it. It's a completely different set of skills. I wouldn't need to know anything about marketing as a worship pastor, for example. So yeah, quite different.
Yeah, so I mean, just for listeners, I toured with Pete just one time when none of his other guitarists were available, which was really, really good fun.
Hugely appreciated that.
Oh, mate, it was so much fun. It was an absolute pleasure. And so, yeah, we just kind of just chatted a lot, didn't we, on on our road trip across Europe. So I guess what I'd love to hear more about is, I guess, that transition time, because having toured with you, I've listened to like your entire back catalogue, partly out of enjoyment, but partly out of just getting an idea of where you're coming from as an artist, because that's kind of what I like to do as a session player. And it is a really broad and varied journey that you've been on creatively. But what was it that kind of, because you've been recording and releasing your own music for years. So what was it that kind of drew you, out of that worship pastor role and transitioning into this new venture? Around,
2014, I released an album called I Hear Your Voice. And the reason for releasing that project was, at the time in our church, I really wanted to create a resource that would help people meet with God personally. And I felt that would affect Sundays in a positive way if there was more of a kind of focus on that. And so I started writing songs that were of a kind of personal devotional focus, I guess. Just really trying to draw people in to pause and to reflect and to have that deeper time with God on a daily basis, if possible. So I released that eventually, and on a shoestring budget. And ever since then, I thought, well, I need to keep writing, because I'd kind of played gigs, I'd done a lot of that kind of stuff and played my own stuff until joining the worship pastor role. And it was that role that kind of, I was like, I don't think I've got much time to be able to write extra stuff. So to find, oh, hang on a minute, I still feel a calling to write songs. Maybe it's not going to be the big kind of church bangers that we've maybe become accustomed to, but they were songs that were heartfelt and real and perhaps helpful for the local community, and that was really cool. So released that 2014, and then started writing for another project. And during that time, it was just a time of real wrestling and soul searching for me personally anyway, over my calling, over who I was, I guess, what kind of leader I wanted to be. And working for the church is not easy. There's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that maybe you just don't know happen until you do work for the church. And I'd seen quite a lot of that stuff, and reflecting on that kind of thing, and what is this what I'm called to do, or is there something else? And I felt torn between leadership opportunities, which I was getting, and this other thing, the creative in me, that was just desperate to create more, and knowing that in the context I was in, I was going to have to choose one or other, and it wasn't possible to do both really well. And so I very kindly was given some time off by my boss at the time, and he sort of gave me 20 days unpaid leave to record another project, and that project was called Vulnerability. I met this guy called Ian Hutchison, who is a producer up there, and I was looking for a producer for this project. The guy I was originally going to work with, who had done I Hear Your Voice, wasn't available, and I was just looking around for somebody that I felt I could build a relationship with and trust. And I don't know if you've heard of a worship leader, Alan McKinley, Scottish guy, now based in the States, but really awesome guy. And we happened to just hit it off at Big Church Day Out one time, and we were chatting. I said, do you know any producers that are any good? And he said, you got to meet Ian. So we had a call. Ian was basically like, I don't normally work with Christians. I am a Christian, but I don't normally work with Christians, blah, blah, blah. But your stuff sounds interesting. Let's maybe talk some more. I might be interested. And I just had this hunch this guy was the real deal, and I wanted to work with him. We ended up hitting it off and had the best time of recording, to the point where after I think we'd recorded most of the project, I spent 2 weeks up there, and I came back thinking, I was standing at the bus stop about to go back to the airport because, hey, go figure, it's quicker and cheaper to fly down south than it is to get the train or drive. And I was like, God, I'm really nervous about this. This feels like this has got something on it, and it's going to require more than what I can give to it. Because I was kind of working 1 day a week as a side project on this whole I Hear Your Voice thing, and 5 days of a worship pastor. And I was pretty like scared what that would look like. And that was the start of me soul searching and saying, well, what is this thing meant to be? We were also having a baby at the time. And so there were a lot of things to consider, and I just felt God say, I want you to pursue this. And it was a massive decision to make because I liked being a worship pastor. I enjoyed that role. And I felt, you know, especially when it comes to leading the team, I just loved our team. We had an amazing group of people, and it was very hard to lay that down. But I believe that Vulnerability Project was the catalyst for me stepping out. And here we are today.
Amazing. I was going to say, like, it must be like a great strength of relationship you had with Ian to kind of fly to Scotland on such a regular basis.
Yeah. And we've kept working with each other. We've produced 3 projects together. And every project we go a little deeper. And the great thing is, he doesn't want me, you know, I think we understand each other in this way, that we're trying to create something, the way I describe Pyramid Park to people who are Christians, because it's like you say, that there's been quite a journey from project to project. And even with the new stuff that I'm about to release, it's even gone even further. And I call it like a bridge between kingdom and culture. I don't feel like, for me, Vulnerability was a worship album that wasn't played at worship events. It was played at other events that sometimes were Christian and sometimes weren't. Not an Island, I've not had a chance to tour that. That's the second album I did under Pyramid Park. And that's definitely more the bridge between. And then this project Anomaly that I'm working on at the moment is even further that way. And I just have a passion for people to meet with God in a way, like, I guess you'd call it, like, in the Bible, like, there's David, and David played the harp, and as he played, Saul was delivered from whatever tormenting spirit was afflicting him. And I kind of like that. Like, the anointing wasn't even in his voice, it was just in his fingers. And as he just played, because he was used to being in the presence of God, it didn't matter where he was, but the atmosphere shifted. And I really believe, like, there are moments when I've played in these places where no one knows I'm a Christian. I don't need to preach it to people. I just need to play. And as I play, I'm believing for a moment where people encounter this mystical spiritual thing, which they're probably thinking is a really amazing vibe or whatever language they would use, experience. but it's the presence of God, and there's a moment there for people to really meet with him. And I don't know about you, but like as a worship leader, that really excites me, probably a bit more than sometimes leading Sunday after Sunday, to be honest, because I feel it's probably got the potential for a little bit more one-on-one impact in people's lives that, I don't know, I've just seen it work, and I want to see more of that sort of stuff happen.
I think that's really exciting though, because I mean, it's all great what we do within church culture and stuff like that, but like we're called to, you know, take it out of our four walls and, you know, stop it becoming this like it's only for the Christians. I mean, if it's only for the Christians, kind of, my opinion is, what's the point, really? Like, do you know what I mean? Like if we're not kind of showing this amazing, I love that term, like this mystical kind of, this thing that is overwhelming kind of presence of God. If we're not willing to share that, it's kind of like, you know, we found something really amazing and we're like trying to keep it for ourselves. So I love that sentiment. I got it kind of like on a side note, and it's just for my interest, just because I love names. Where did the name Pyramid Park come from?
It's a long story. No, it's not really. I was looking for a name for about 3 days solid, and every name that I liked was taken, and I didn't want to replicate anyone. And so I was like, well, maybe a shape is a good idea, and we can base something logo-like around a good solid shape. And I was like, pyramid's quite a cool shape. Maybe I should go with that. And so that was the start of the journey, really. It just landed on a shape and tried to build a brand around something rather than find a name and then be like, oh, don't know whether I can do any decent merch from it or anything like that. So it was a very non-spiritual reason. It was just a brand thing more than anything else.
Yeah, I think that's kind of cool. And Park, I'm guessing, is just like alliteration.
Yeah,
cool. I love that stuff though, because like sometimes you think you look at band names or whatever the thing is, and you kind of, you kind of start to think of like, what does that mean? What does that mean? And and like sometimes it's like nothing. It meant nothing. Like, but I think that's really cool because you can put your own meaning on it. It makes me think of like Blink-182.
Yeah.
That this is exactly the same. They were called Blink to start with, and then when they started getting bigger, they realized that there was already a band called Blink. And then on the back of one of their guitar cabs, there was the number 182, and they went, "That'll do."
Yeah,
it means nothing, and I'm like that. Like,
there comes a point where you're like, I can't faff around with this name thing any longer. I've just got to get on with it. And so, 3 days was enough faffing for me.
Yeah,
cool.
And I think like it's been interesting. Like I have had some backlash from the name, and people are like, oh, you know, you're talking about slavery, the Egyptians, and all that, and I'm like, no, but you know, it's fine. You know, I think sometimes Christians get a little bit more uptight about this sort of thing, and I understand that partly, but also I'm like, at the end of the day, you know, Switchfoot is a bit of a weird name, but they're a pretty good band.
See, I thought you were going to say people had a problem with like Illuminati or something because of the pyramids.
Exactly, yeah. And I didn't even think about it when I was naming it. I probably maybe wouldn't have called it that if I'd have realised, but hey.
I see, there's a side of me that would like, when I thought about it, I'd be like, I'm definitely picking that name now. Just...
Yeah.
Sometimes it's good to be an agitator, isn't it?
I think so.
Exactly. So I guess I want to come at our usual first question. I kind of want to come at it a bit sideways, because, you know, our first question is usually kind of like, what was the first experience you remember of congregational worship? I'd be interested in kind of hearing how that ties in with your kind of musical journey. Like, how did you end up starting to sing and play guitar? And how did that kind of then figure into your first experience of congregational worship? It's okay if it's a long story.
Great. There is a long story, probably. I mean, I grew up in a Baptist church, so quite a strict one. And there was singing, but it was all hymns, and you know, it was probably the most interesting part of the service, which wasn't saying much because I didn't like the hymns particularly. But there were a few that kind of have stayed with me, and I do appreciate them. So I was in that church for a while. When I was 11 years old, my dad got cancer, and he died 3 weeks after us finding out. And that was probably a real pivotal moment in my life where I really wanted to be there when he died, and I was fortunate enough to be by his bedside when he died. And a few minutes after, the doctor comes and certifies that his death. I wasn't expecting that. This random guy walking in. But I was sitting on the carpet of my mum and dad's room, and I don't know, reflecting. I don't know what I was doing, but I was in my own headspace. And I felt a voice speak to me, and the voice said, "You can choose me to be your father or reject me to be your father. You choose." And I knew somehow instinctively, I'd never heard this voice before, but I knew that it was God. And for those who listen and I have no faith at all, it's like, yeah, well, or it could be an imaginary voice. I've never heard anything so clearly in my life in some ways. And I've just prayed back, God, I need you to be my father, help. And that was probably the best prayer I could have prayed. And during that next few years, I just had one after another male kind of father figures come into my life for either a short while or a longer while, and just bring some stability to me in a way that only a dad could really do. And I saw the goodness and the kindness of God. And I somehow experienced this love from God that I don't know whether I would have experienced had I've not lost my own dad. I don't know for sure, but I would say it was because of that I experienced something of the father heart of God that I may not have done otherwise. We ended up moving churches, and walked into this church which was loud, and they had drums, and it was much bigger than the Baptist church. It was wild. There were flags, there were people dancing, jumping, and long services. And I was captivated by this experience of these people really mean what they're singing, and they're going for it. They're not holding anything back. And if in a few short weeks, I was just I can feel something is here, that I am experiencing the same heart, which I believe is God, that I experience and have experienced walking through my dad's death. And I was probably 12 or 13 at the time. They had a band there. I loved the drummer. He really inspired me. I kind of liked some of the music. I kind of didn't like some of the music. And then I was invited to this thing called Solid, which was a youth gathering upstairs in the lounge on Sunday nights. And they had a youth band leading worship, and it was raucous. It was wild and great music. They blacked out the whole... I came in summer, and they blacked out this whole room with these massive drapes. It got lights. People had worked all through their summer holidays to buy these lights for this gathering. And I was just wow, this is where I belong. I loved music. I played the violin since about the age of 8, I think. And so music was part of who I was, I guess. But seeing these guys really just expressing their faith in music was so inspiring for me. And, there would be times where we would really worship and really give of ourselves in worship in a way that was just... No one told us what to do. So we were just doing our thing. And we were kids in Norfolk. I grew up in Norfolk. So there wasn't a lot going on. So this is an amazing event because of that, even more so. But, we would sometimes dance so much and jump around so much that my legs would ache the next day walking to school. I was limping to school. And there was this mix of this incredible energy and fervor, and also just this wildness, which I was just I get it, and I'm all in. So I picked up the guitar and started playing and singing. And when I was 15, I was given the chance to lead worship. Don't think I did too well, but hey, that was really where it started. I started songwriting at 16 for this gathering. Then I ended up taking over the worship stuff for this small gathering, and then in church. And I realized this is part of who I'm meant to be. And deep down, I think I've always really connected with the wild side of it. I say that at home on my own, I was just worshipping all the time. Like, it sounds silly, but I was doing my homework and I was just sitting on the edge of my bed playing songs to God and feeling this same presence that I felt on Sundays at home. And I'm like, it's possible to have this in two places, not just. And so I was having this real intimate time at home, and then these wild times at church, Sunday nights at church. And somehow all of this was like, I want all of this to be part of me for the rest of my life, both the wild and the intimate. And I guess, like, as you grow older, you kind of, the wild gets knocked out of you a little bit, and the time for intimacy maybe is diminished. But I'm really hungry for more of that. And I think the thing that frustrates me is when I don't see one or both of those things at work in whatever worship looks like. That maybe answered more than one question, but that is my journey.
It's really interesting you kind of say like the wild and the intimate, because I kind of like, in some ways, although I think there are definitely wild moments on the Vulnerability album, I feel like Vulnerability is kind of like the intimate and Not an Island is more of the wild. It's interesting how that makes, it's like hearing that like puts so much context around you as an artist. I'm like, oh, I get it now.
Maybe, yeah. And I think also I really respect people who have musically, I feel like I'm just doing my little thing in this corner of the world, but people who've had much bigger influence than me, who have been prepared to, well, let's just change it up and do something completely different, and almost having this, I don't care, not like an arrogance, but just like, if God is doing something here, let's do it. And let's not be too afraid to go there and lean into that.
Got me thinking when you mentioned kind of like the wild and the intimate. I think that's such a kind of like interesting kind of like two words to put together. Because I completely agree with you there. Like, we need the wild and we need the intimate. I'd love to hear your kind of just dive a little bit deeper into kind of what that means for you, like both of them separately and together, and how they can kind of coexist in one relationship.
Sure. I say this with the caveat that I feel I don't have all the answers with this, but for me, like, there's something about when you first meet with God or have an encounter with God that is kind of like, you don't realize at the time, but it's life defining. And I think in those moments it's good to like reflect and think, well, why was that what it was? So for me in these gatherings, I think what it did was it unlocked me. And I would naturally be probably the shy, insecure kid at school who was really geeky probably and would work hard, but it unlocked something inside of me that I always knew was there, but I could never express. And maybe being British is, or English maybe is a better thing to say, is like part of that. But it's like, I really do believe like there's a verse that talks about out of the innermost part, or the well from within, something coming up from within us. And sometimes we pray in church circles for the Holy Spirit to come fall upon us, which is great. But I also believe there's a well that God has put inside of us that needs to come up and come out. And, perhaps people think that's through speaking in tongues, and I speak in tongues. I've got no problem with that at all. I think that's awesome. But I sometimes think our worship needs to come from this heart cry of deep within, where it's pain and it's joy, where it's like, I'm really struggling right now, God, and like able to let out that almost like this groan. It talks in the Bible about creation groans and longs for Jesus's return, and I'm like, well, I'm not seeing too much groaning in me. What's wrong? What is this? And I think the reason why the wild gets contained is because whether it's through our programs or our conditioning, but things get in the way, and the wild stuff gets blocked. And I think God likes to sometimes just unblock that stuff, and sometimes it only gets unblocked through suffering or difficult circumstances, because that's the only way that's the only moment when sometimes we're able to let out that groan of like anguish almost, which is sometimes the purest form of worship. So for me, I know I'm doing all right when I'm allowing that inner like desperation almost to come out, but with that comes this kind of sense of, oh, maybe I'm starting to believe this stuff again, or I'm starting to really have faith for this thing that I never thought would ever happen. Some of it is through singing, and I don't think we sing that much in church anymore. Like, I know we sing, well, we don't at the moment, but we hum with masks on or whatever it is. For some, I've not been back to a physical church for a while in the UK, but like, there's something when we can sing and then we can really sing, and sometimes we just need to give volume to stuff and let it out of us, even if it's not a nice sound. I'm all for that, and I think something is released in us that's not just getting stuff off our chest, but it's a spiritual thing that's gritty, and it's like, it's the pain as well as the making a sound thing. And then with the intimate, I mean, I think God delights just to love us, and I'm trying harder to make space in my life to just be loved by him, because I find it hard sometimes to be loved, if I'm being honest. And I really want to be like, well, God, I can't be a loving husband unconditionally unless I receive your unconditional love first. And so I've been trying, I guess, in my own life to make a little bit more time for just sometimes being that kid sitting on the edge of the bed playing the guitar, not to play guitar, but to just worship. And I think it's from that, the way I put it is, I guess you're on a cliff top, you dive in to the water, but you have to go to this height of praise before you go to this depth of intimacy. And I think some of that kind of the wild stuff is in praise, whether it's pretty praise or ugly praise. It's a form of praise, I think. And then it leaves room for then the Holy Spirit to say, okay, well, I can come in and feel that where that pain has been. I can come and guide you in this moment, or maybe you just lean on me a little bit more and lean a little bit less on your own understanding. Yeah, I could say so much more, but I think making space for both and being open to both is really, really important. And I'm on a quest to kind of make more space for both those things.
Okay, so, I mean, you've kind of touched on it already, which is really awesome. Our second question is kind of like, what is your favorite thing about congregational worship? And I would also ask, just like worship in general as well. I think you have touched on that quite a lot, but like, if you were to pin down like the thing, what would you say?
I think it's when we are one in a room. There are moments when we're all singing together, but we are not united. We are just a whole group of voices. And from a worship leader's perspective, you just know when we're all in this together, and whatever the reason, sometimes God just breathes on something, and it's like this sense of we're all in, and we're all sold out for the same purpose, and we're so willing in this moment to make the room, make the space, and let God be God, I guess. And when those moments happen, you just kind of want to step back and let it settle, whatever that thing is, whether it's prayer, praise, whatever. So it's that unity as a congregation of a random group of people who would never hang out normally, who have got one purpose and one call on their lives to put God first, really. And I think when that happens, it's just like, well, anything can happen. And you go from another day, another service, another song to, oh, hello. and it's like the whole room, I don't know what it is, but there's like this collective revelation that comes that, wow, we're in the presence of the Almighty, or, there's something holy. And holiness, like those holy moments, they don't always happen that often, but when they do, for me, that's really, really precious, and to be protected and to be like treasured, because I really do believe in those moments. Things like healing is easy because we're just willing to go with God. I'm not saying healing, I don't know everything about healing. I mean, man, it's so complex, isn't it? And there's so many things, in that. But I think room for God to do what he wants to do in those moments is really exciting and also really scary. And that's a great place to be.
I think that's really beautiful in the sense of, and we've like a lot of kind of people that have been on so far, and like I've been talking about this a lot lately, especially with like lockdown happening and not being allowed to be around people. I think that sense, what I'm getting from this is just like my perspective of what you've been saying is like that sense of that community, isn't it? That real kind of unadulterated, like this is community, like we are together. Like, it is so powerful. And like, and I've said this before, like this is coming from someone who like, I'm an only child and like I can be by myself and be absolutely fine. And it's only been through this lockdown happening where I've gone, oh, you know what? Like maybe this community thing is really, really important. And I'm reading a book called The Divine Dance by Richard Rohr at the moment. And that's just kind of like blowing my mind. And it's all about how that God like is in essence community with us. And I just think like I love that where you said like sometimes we can be in a room together and we can all be singing, but we're not unified. And it's really different, isn't it? And I'm like just from what you just said, I'm bounced into like lots of kind of past episodes we've had where Lois Secco in episode 4 was talking about how like we should enter a room and be completely and 100% for each other. And then like when you were talking about like healing within that kind of community, like I don't know how it works either. I wouldn't even profess to say I know how it works, but like makes me think of the episode that was released today with my wife, where she talks about like we can't have more of Jesus. Like we already have the like all of him already. Like we just need to allow him to have more of us. And I think for us to do that within community, I think like, and I don't know what your opinion is on this, but I think that music is so important, and like, and in throughout history, it's been such like at the forefront of like change. And I think as a worship community, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think we can, because like some churches get it better than some and some get it worse, but some churches like it's, I've seen better community at a bingo hall than I have at this church, and that's really saddening. Do you think like as a collective of musical worshipers we can help push that community aspect forward a bit more?
Sure, I don't see why not. And I think that for me, I mean, I'm talking from personal experience maybe, but certainly at C3 when I was worship pastor, the thing that I quickly realized was if we are not doing this as a team, worshiping together, like away from the platform, what right do we have to lead this? So one thing we used to do was, we'd have rehearsals every week, but one Tuesday of the month would be worship nights. And that was like really stripped back, really unprepared worship nights that weren't flashy at all, but just intimate. And those times for me did two things. One, it showed me who really got the kind of worship thing and who were just the musicians. And by just the musicians, I don't mean all the guitarists didn't get it. It was like sometimes it was people who you think should get it and didn't, and or your worship leaders that didn't get it. And secondly, it drew us together with a common, I think it gave us hunger for God again. And the third thing was prayer. We just naturally started to pray more, and then care for each other a bit more. And suddenly there were guys turning up on a Sunday asking, "Oh, how did that thing go? 2 days ago we prayed for. Have you seen any breakthrough there?" And several times I had people on the team saying, I'm so thankful for those times because we've been able to share something a bit deeper. And someone's asked me about it this morning. That never used to happen to me, or whatever. So we found as we worshipped together, suddenly there were 30 or 40 people on team who happened to be not on team that Sunday, dotted around the church, who really had a more of a hunger for God all of a sudden, and would start to influence that part of that church service a little bit more, and so on. The ripple effect started to grow, and I do agree. Like, we had some of my favorite moments have been in community, but the deeper community of, say, in a worship team as well, because there's something very precious about, if you worship together, you generally stick together quite well and back each other. And, maybe in a larger church, you can't have great community with everyone, but you can with a smaller group of people within that larger community. That's a kind of roundabout way of saying, yes, I agree with you.
No, I think that's what, like, I love what you said a bit, like, about, like, on the whole, like, and I've definitely seen the opposite of this, but, like, on the whole, like, if you worship together, you stick together. And I think it's, if, like, in the most perfect conditions, I think that's because in worship, you are allowed to be vulnerable. And I think through being vulnerable, you open yourself, open yourself up to other people.
Yeah.
And that's where, like, real relationships are grown. Is like, there's that phrase of, like, who your real friends are when the kind of, like, things start to go a little bit wrong with you, and those people stay. And I think in worship, you can have those times where everything's wild and you're going crazy together, and that's amazing. And we need that. But also those times where, like, you are breaking down, like, there's just a time where you can physically not stand, or whatever it is, and the people around you are witnessing this with you and standing with you, and there's that camaraderie in that. It's almost like, I am not, like, because I've never been in the forces at all, but I just have this like thing of, like, you're in the trenches together, and there's that bond that's almost formed that's really unbreakable.
But you are in the trenches spiritually, I think, and not to want to link war and worship too much, but there is a sense that actually, as we go about this, let's be believing for the people down the road who are washing the dishes or in Sainsbury's or whatever, and actually that they will have a divine encounter with God through the expression of love that we are experiencing in this place. I do believe that. I really do.
So shall we hop on to the third question, the famous third question? Honestly, first of all, I just want to kind of echo, like, what Carl has already said. That it's just so life-giving hearing you talk about music and about worship and about creativity. I've always loved it, and it's it's absolutely great to hear just about the kind of wildness and intimacy and community. Like, that just sounds like goals, man. That what you had at that church just sounds fantastic. But what would you change? What would be the one thing you would change about worship culture, kind of more broadly?
Oh, that's really hard to say one thing. But I guess I get sadder when I feel that church has become a bit too polished, and I've been part of that process, so that's what I wrestle with, because I see the value of doing things really well, and I don't enjoy worshipping in community with other people when the singer is out of tune or the guitarist is playing the wrong thing or whatever, like, and my ear is very aware of all of that stuff going on. But I can drown that out if I know, like, it kind of, that takes second place, and you can really feel the heart of the people. And I guess I just get saddened when I think it's all a bit too predictable, to the point where I know we're going to go with this song, and then someone's going to say something, but not too long, but long enough, and then it does become longer, and then another song, and then you're expecting the song with the build, and it's got to be this length, and there's a timer, and I get all of that. I understand all of that, and I see the value of respecting people's time and stuff. But I do miss the moments when sometimes, and sometimes, as a worship leader, you're like a song and a half in, and it's going to suck. Like, there's no way anything's going to change. It's just going to be one of those mornings. And I'm just like, why can't we just get the preach up now? Because it ain't going anywhere. and we just need to have somebody else change this thing up. But there are other times when I believe like, oh, God is really moving here. Let's just let this thing happen and see can we just take the risk to take a few more minutes to just see and explore. And I just get saddened when things are so polished. That I'm not anti any big church or anything like that. I get it. I've been part of that structure. I understand. So here's an example. We always use Click. Like, I have no problem playing to Click for anything. But for me, where that changes is when you're using tracks a lot in worship, and it's kind of like we're quite rigidly stuck to this thing, and it's hard to maneuver out of this this kind of track, I guess. And even though you can repeat and loop things, it's still kind of confined a little bit. And as a worship leader, I want to be released to lead people into worship, and I want to be released to worship. And sometimes having one too many things confine me. Like, I feel I'm not at best service to the congregation to help people encounter God. And I know people have different opinions on that, and I get that. So I am more and more inclined to connect with worship movements that they keep things simple. I'm all for lighting, good lighting. I'm all for like great sound, great parts, everyone learning their parts, good rehearsals, timekeeping, all this stuff that I've drilled into team, for years. But when I look at what people like United Pursuit are doing, I think there's something very pure, and they've kept something raw, and yet they've done it well. But you always sense that anything could happen, and and I miss that in church, because I know if I go to church, I know exactly what's going to happen. I'll have a decent experience, but will it always? I'm not talking about my own church all the time. I'm talking generally. Like, it can be very predictable, and like, it's kind of sad. Like, I get quite saddened by that, because I don't always believe we are serving people well by that. We are to a point, and I don't. Do you know what? I don't think. Personally, I think the whole culturally relevant, seeker-sensitive thing is a lie. And because I don't think many people will just turn up to church. If I'm being honest, they might turn up to an event or a gig, but I don't think. I do believe inviting people to church is good, but I don't think many people do. So, kind of, what's the point? And why can't we just be a little bit freer and unapologetic about who we are? Wrestle with the things we need to wrestle with. I think I like what the guys like United Pursuit are doing, because I think they've kind of also stood against some of the political stuff, which personally I don't think you should, as a church leader, be taking political stances on things, unless it's very, very extreme, like you're in Nazi Germany or something. So I get very uncomfortable with that kind of thing as well. So I don't know what I'm saying, but there's a bunch of things that, not just one thing.
No, it's all, like, honestly, I could talk about this stuff for hours. Like, even like when you started kind of slightly dipping your toe into the whole political stuff as well, because that's a really important conversation I think needs to be kind of had. And obviously everyone's going to have different points of view. The one thing I wanted to kind of come back to was when you were talking about who kind of just randomly turns up at church. And obviously, I'm not going to put a blanket statement out there and say it doesn't happen. Of course it happens. I know people who have done that, and that's amazing.
It happens fairly regularly at our church, which is kind of controversial for me to say it almost.
but it is like, on the whole, it is kind of rare. And like you said there, if we're trying to, I think with anything, whether you're doing you're artistic or you're creating whatever it is, if you're trying to appease this kind of like middle of the road thing, just so you don't offend or stand out too much or scare people or whatever, you're always going to compromise somewhere, aren't you? No matter what you do, whether that's church or anything. And I think like I've never heard anyone say that actually, and that was almost like this light bulb moment. I was like, oh yeah, like we do, like we kind of go, oh, like in lots of places, oh don't go too crazy because what if someone walks in and then you freak them out? It's like I guarantee they've seen worse.
They'll feel uncomfortable, but maybe that uncomfortable thing will actually provoke them to reconsider some things. I always feel like, and it's done in language sometimes, isn't it? But phrases like, if you feel comfortable, please raise your hands or whatever. And I'm kind of like, well, I don't know whether I'd have seen Jesus say, if you feel comfortable, do this. Jesus kind of said, eat my body and drink my blood. And I know Jesus also said some really nice things, so maybe I'm taking it out of context here. I probably am. Don't write to me afterwards and call me a heretic. But, it's like, well, does everything have to be comfortable?
No.
So
I think the answer is no.
No, straight
yeah,
answer.
there we go.
No.
You solved it.
The end of the podcast. Well
End
done,
of the
guys.
podcast. I think what you said is absolutely right, though, isn't it? It's just like we've talked about again, I'll come back to it again. The ice cream metaphor of worship being delicious but vanilla. Because people like vanilla ice cream.
Do you know, I've never heard that before. That's amazing.
But and Lois, like in episode 4, talked about trusting God to bridge the gaps. Actually taking the opportunity to be a bit more free and trusting that God will bridge the gaps, because God doesn't need our PR. You know what I mean? Like
Yes,
you know what I mean? He doesn't need us to be his public relations team, because he is wild. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He is a being that, we have been struggling to understand for thousands of years. And also, it's like, if, kind of just talking about, what, like, just bringing it back to what you're doing as Pyramid Park as well. If we don't create that space in the church to explore that kind of more wild and untamed side of things, to say what we're bringing to the table that's different, and are we, what are we releasing to outside the walls of the church? Because you end up with people who, are wanting to pursue a different creative avenue like yourself, or you end up with people who are kind of frustrated with church music and just never end up playing in church and end up just going off and doing their own thing. It's kind of, I guess what I'm saying is, like, what are we bringing to the table apart from a nice vanilla concert if we're not allowing ourselves to be a bit wild?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I find it really hard because I really believe and back the church, but I know when we've touched on something, and I know when we're just going through the motions. I've done it for too long, and I know when I am. That's the worst part about it. It's like I could lead people in a good time of worship, and it's kind of not in the spirit. It's soulish, to put it in very biblical terms. Like, this is just, going through the motions, or whatever you want to call it. And perhaps we are just too comfortable, and perhaps things like COVID have obviously, it's been very difficult, but for a lot of people, but it's moments like these that you do step back and you start to think a little deeper and start to think, well, okay, like, who am I as a person? What am I called to? Where is the sweet spot in my life? Or another way of putting it perhaps is to use a very Bible word, anointing. Where is that anointing? When do I sense the pleasure and the grace and the favor of God on me? I know, Steve, from working with you, when you play, something happens in you as a person, let alone the people that you play to, and you kind of get the sense that, oh, hello, something's going on here, and you can't necessarily describe it, but I know when I've seen you whack out a solo or something, you come alive, And it's not because you're being showy. You're just like, this is part of who you've always been called to be, is being expressed on this instrument that, just like David years ago on his harp. And I just think, wow, that's I just think there's so much colour in the church that maybe we haven't yet explored, and it's very easy to become corporate about it all. And I get why. Don't get me wrong, I understand all of that stuff as well, and I value some of that stuff. But I am hungry for some shifts to happen, and that excites me when I start to see that kind of thing more and more.
I think it's just being able to hold these tools lightly, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, because I'm hearing what you're saying, and I agree with it. I think we all do. Like, we're involved in this stuff, and this, like, these kind of processes that we have, and like the tools and stuff. They're amazing, of course. Like, they're fantastic, and they're such wonderful tools that we have been given. But I think the issue comes is when we rely on those, like, over being vulnerable, being real, being free, like being like open to being a little bit wild, letting those intimate times come. It's like when we, I think we do it as humans as well, not even just the church.
Sure.
Like, there is a tendency to just go through the motions because it's really easy. Like, it's really easy to do that. Like, it doesn't take anything of you. Like, being vulnerable and real is in essence, it's a sacrifice, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have to give something of yourself to be real, I guess. Even in, like, the happy times of it, it's really easy just to kind of go through the motions, just as a human. And I definitely think, like, us as a church, and obviously when we say the church, we're obviously speaking of this kind of like non kind of tangible idea, because everywhere's really different. But like us as the church, I guess we should be that place where we're more willing to go to those places, and we're not going to get it perfect. Of course we're not. Like, I've definitely been in those places as well. I was thinking a question when kind of talking about through all of this and coming back to that, like, seeker friendly idea. Cause you see those YouTube videos of, like, people posting, like, mental Christians, like, I mean, where you see all, like, the craziness that can go on as well, and some of that may be genuinely real, and that's amazing, and some of it could be, like, it's hype and, like, come on,
sure.
Yeah,
I've been there with both.
Exactly, yeah, exactly, but then I also think of, like, the more kind of seen things that happens way more often of, like, people just standing there with their arms folded. And I think, which out of the two, that craziness, I know that obviously they're two extremes, but one of them definitely happens way more.
Yeah.
Those two extremes, which one really is going to turn people off? The crazy, or the whole congregation stood there while the worship happens like this?
Yeah. Looking
bored. Which one really is going to turn them off?
Yeah.
That's a good point.
And I think, like, I and again, the whole excellence thing, I've got no problem with it per se, but I do think that there's a generation of people who are hungry for authenticity, and they don't want to be necessarily told what to do. They just want to see how you deal with the crap that comes with life, and how I grieved the first year without my dad is probably going to have more impact on someone's life than me telling them how to rejoice in the Lord always. And, like, I don't disagree that we should rejoice in God always, but the reality of life is that I don't. And maybe I should. Maybe I'm not very spiritual, but I think people connect with the pain and the reality of stuff. And I think sometimes we can even pretend to say, oh, we're going to be really real about this, and then we only share half the thing. And there are people who are just craving, can you just say it as it really is? Like, not just, oh, I had a bad week at work, but, like, I am doubting myself, and I don't think I can ever, whatever it might be. But I think that speaks to people. And if we can find a place where we don't have to pretend to be, no one's pretending. I don't think no one's meaning to pretend, but we kind of get into this way of doing things that seems to be right, that we can hide behind. And I don't think that's healthy. And I don't think it's attractive to people.
I was watching this YouTube video with Rob Bell the other day, and I'll probably branded a heretic for even watching Rob Bell, so sorry.
We are, generally speaking, Rob Bell fans on this podcast, so you can brand all of us a heretic. So. Come at me, bro.
Yeah.
I'd say don't at me, but at me. Let's have a conversation. And it was basically, I haven't watched it all yet, but the video is titled The Introduction to Joy. And he talks at the beginning, and I'm just kind of coming off the back of what you said there. He talks about how that like kind of apathy and kind of being cynical is in essence lazy, because it doesn't take anything. Kind of like what I was saying, it doesn't take anything to be like that, and it also doesn't go. He says it doesn't go far enough, and that joy, I think we've definitely misunderstood what it means, like what the word joy actually means. And he talks about, and I am paraphrasing, I'm probably going to get this wrong. So like, just look on whoever, like if you're listening, just look on YouTube and he will give a way better explanation to this. But talks about how that joy gives space to anxiety, and it gives space to depression, and it gives space to all the, the pitfalls that can happen in life. It gives space to that, and it embraces it. And it's not, joy isn't this like, it's not this thing that where, you're covering it up or you're pretending to be okay, put on a happy face. Like that isn't joy. And I had this phrase of like, so then joy isn't this kind of like running away from life. It's an embracing of it, but from a higher place. And like what I get from you just talking throughout the podcast, to be honest, is like worship is this place where we can just sit and stand, or wherever we're doing, in joy, but also whatever that looks like. So whatever joy looks like at that time.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so just watch the video. Honestly, it's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's interesting for me. Like, I'm also a big believer of choosing, like, to have a mindset of Christ. For example, like I read the other day, like, sow to the Spirit to reap the Spirit. I'm like, right. And I was checking myself throughout the day, like, am I sowing to the Spirit? Nope. So I do believe in like some of the, like choosing stuff as well, for sure. But there is authenticity that I think we can get better at authenticity.
Just as people, I think we can get better at authenticity, can't we?
Yeah, I hold my hand up.
I can, and I am one who champions this as well, and I'm like, we need to be more authentic, we need to be more vulnerable, but then on the other side, there's a part of me that's like, nah, I don't want to today. Yeah, I'm okay. Yeah. I'm good. I want to hide behind my mask. I want to go and live up in my mind castle. I don't want to, like, do you know what I mean? So if I can be like that, and I'm more on the side of, come on everyone, let's just be super vulnerable together, like someone who's not comfortable with that whatsoever, like, and I'm not like digging on that type of person whatsoever, because obviously they've got their coping mechanisms just like I've got mine. So how much more to them is that vulnerability so much harder?
Yeah.
I mean, I think my kind of desperate hope for when this pandemic is all over, I really hope the church doesn't too quickly scrabble towards finding a normal that resembles exactly how it was before.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I really feel like, just off the back of what we've been talking about, I think like in terms of like my experience of church during lockdown, is that there does need to be more space for authenticity. There needs to be more space for vulnerability. There needs to be space for, I'm just not feeling this today.
Yeah.
And I hope, like my desperate hope is that the church will, once again become a space for authenticity, and that, like you said, like the kind of, the polish will become less important? Like, because I think excellence isn't a problem if it springs out of a place of authenticity. But I think it becomes a problem, doesn't it, when it becomes when excellence becomes the destination rather than a symptom of something broader going on.
I just thinking there, right, and it made me think, there's loads of scriptures where it talks about us like playing skillfully and like being excellent in our craft, and like you think of like with the talents and like, giving everything. But and I think we do this so much with scripture, and we take these little bits, whether this is excellence thing or whether it is like calling people out on sin and like we take these things and we don't see the heart. So we take these kind of procedures and ideas and we go, that's the thing we need to focus on. And then we forget the person behind that kind of that skill, or like, what does this mean? Okay, what does it mean to be excellent for you? Does it mean to be able to play in like Snarky Puppy? Maybe, but it probably doesn't for most of us. So what does excellent mean for you? Like, is excellent for you rocking up with, so I don't know if you've been say someone's been playing guitar for a year and they know how to play some basic songs and stuff. So excellence for them is making sure they can do that. But like, it's a heart position, isn't it?
I was just going to say it's excellence of heart, isn't it? Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot of, I've learned this through watching our senior pastor here in Cambridge, like that, there is some black and white, but there's also a lot of grey in our faith and our journey, and we are shaped by our culture that we live in as well. And I think maybe it's just age. You get older and you appreciate the grey areas. It's okay to explore them and to be undecided on some things as well. I'm undecided about loads of things that I used to think was so black and white. I'm also pretty clear on some things that maybe were grey in the past, and that's also good. But I guess it's being open, isn't it? And being willing and saying, okay, God, here I am. I like the posture that Mother Teresa had. She kind of, I don't know if you've read, there's a book called Courageous Leadership by Bill Hybels, and I know very different things about Bill Hybels now. People don't maybe think he's not as popular as he used to be, but the book's really good. And he takes a whole chapter talking about her life, and he talks about some vows that she made before God, way before she became world famous for her wonderful acts and deeds and the way she lived her life. And she made these vows which were basically saying, I'll do your bidding without delay. I will refuse you nothing. I will seek to love you like you've never been loved before. Here am I, send me. And I'm like, whoa, that's pretty much, if I could even come close to some of that stuff, that would be pretty life achievement done, and I think if we could all just aim for something like that, I think that's a pretty good place to start.
Amazing. So just bringing things into land, I guess. Is there anything else that you wanted to kind of add before we wrap things up?
Do you know what? I think I've only just got started. We can't
have to get you back on, dude.
We can't solve it all, can we? But and we are all on our journeys. But it's healthy, I think, to have these conversations, and I think a lot of people will appreciate what you guys are doing. So thanks for having me on here, and appreciate you listening to me ramble for the last however long hour or so.
Oh, we're a podcast of ramblers, so
we are
about it.
Exactly. We need to get that on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Pete, where can people find out more about what you're up to as Pyramid Park?
Sure. Follow me on socials. It's normally number one Pyramid Park. And if you want to find me on Spotify, just search Pyramid Park. I've got new music coming out in the near future as well, for those of you who are excited. And I vlog as well on YouTube, so just search Pyramid Park and you'll either see some random game or me.
I mean, depending when, because obviously this podcast will go out 4 weeks after it's been recorded.
There should be new music out then.
Yeah, super exciting.
Speak as if you're in the future.
Yes, and I can't wait to hear it. / I'm really enjoying listening to it. So yeah, Pete, thank you so much for coming and being on the Deconstructing Worship Podcast for our 11th episode.
My pleasure.
It's been so good, and we'll look forward to kind of seeing where the conversation goes as we carry on.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you, buddy. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Deconstructing Worship. We hope that you got as much from it as we did. We would absolutely love to have you all involved in these conversations, so please find us at Instagram and YouTube, both under the handle at Deconstructing Worship. And please send in any emails with any questions or anything that you would love involved within any kind of future episodes. And our email is deconstructingworship@gmail.com. And we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.